can you please explain the 613 mitzvot or commandments that are in the Torah? I still don't understand where this comes, but taking numbers add up to 613, I think I know what you're relating to, and I'm going to speak about that. Also, why and where did this start? The letters representing the letters. It seems mitzvahs are helping people are more of a foundation to the Jewish religion. So the question is, can you please speak about the 613 commandments? Indeed, in the Torah, we have 613 commandments. To be exact, we have 248 positive commandments, which means do this and do that. And, for example, keep Shabbat, keep kosher, and so on. And you have 365 negative commandments, which are do not do this, do not steal, do not lie, do not this, do not that. Now, 248 and 365, altogether 613 commandments. What's interesting is this. There are lists of those 613 commandments that were composed over the years. Maimonides' list is perhaps the most famous of all. It is called Sefer HaMitzvot. He has a book called the Book of Mitzvot, in which he enumerates each and every one of these 613 commandments in a very strict order, beginning from the very start of the Torah until the very end of the Torah. That's the pattern he follows. And we can open up the Sefer HaMitzvot, and there you can find all of these commandments. There are other books like the Sefer HaChinuch, the Book of Education, that was written by an anonymous author in Barcelona. Some say it was Rabbi Aaron Alevi of Barcelona of the 11th century, who wrote a book also called the Book of Education, in which he takes all of these mitzvot and divides them slightly differently and explains each and every one of them. But that's where the 613 commandments come from the Torah, and again enumerated in these different books that enumerate them. Now, I do want to go a little bit deeper about this, and I think this is what you're relating to. And you have, as mentioned, 248 and 360. Now, what's interesting is this, that there is a book called Sefer HaCharedim that divides them very differently, not according to the order in which they appear in the Torah, but according to the limbs and organs of the body. Because apparently there are 248 limbs in the body and 365 organs in the body. Now, what this book does is that it takes each and every mitzvah and allocates to it a different organ or limb, depending on whether it's positive or negative, showing or conveying the deeper message, the mystical message, that these mitzvot are not just there for us to follow rules, but they are there for us to, in a way, align our bodies, all of its organs and limbs, with God himself. So, for example, when I use my hand to give tzedakah, which is one of the mitzvahs, my hand now is aligned with God, and it becomes holy. When I use my feet to go walk and visit the sick, then my feet now have become holy. So we have an opportunity really to elevate the human body and make it holy each and every day by following these commandments, whether they are negative or positive. But each time, for example, we refrain from speaking bad, from gossiping, which is another commandment, a negative one, then our mouth becomes holy. So this book, Sefer HaCharedim, really introduces the notion that these mitzvot are not just commandments, but they are there really to connect us to God. And it really is rooted in this idea that the word mitzvah does not just mean commandment. Usually people translate it also as good deed. Mitzvah means good deed. No, I'm sorry. The real translation for the word mitzvah is not commandment and it's not good deed. Mitzvah comes from the Hebrew word tzevet, which means to team up or to connect. Why? Because when we do a mitzvah, we connect to God. Again, we connect in a very real way. The organ that we are using to do that mitzvah, the limb that we are using, is not connected to God. And of course, it influences, it shines through, it influences the rest of the body too, and influences psyche, and influences the emotions and everything else. It influences the human being and certainly our surroundings also, because each mitzvah illuminates and creates energy, so to speak. But that's really the big idea of the 613 commandments. And that's why the Mishnah says, and it's a Mishnah that we say very often during the prayer services, that in the name of Rabbi Hanan Kashia, that says that God wanted to bring merit upon the Jewish nation, and therefore he gave them many, many mitzvahs. Now, if you think about this, it's not giving us merit, it's giving us more and more responsibility. In a way, it's strangling us because we have to follow rules all the time. And indeed, there are mitzvahs that pertain to waking up in the morning and to going to sleep at night and to almost every part of our lives. So it's not really bringing merit upon us. What is Rabbi Hanan Kashia saying over here? But really, the deeper meaning is that God gave us 613 opportunities to connect to God. And if we can do one, then let's do another one. If we can do that other one, let's do another one. That's why it's bringing merit to the Jewish nation. If we only had one mitzvah, then maybe that one mitzvah doesn't fit all, and it would be very hard for people to fulfill it. But now we have 630 mitzvot to choose from. So 613 ways, opportunities to connect ourselves to God. And that's great merit. That's why, again, Rabbi Hanan Kashia says what he says. We're going to conclude just this theme and then move on to the next questions. But I remember being with my beloved mentor, Rabbi Steinsaltz, of blessed memory in San Francisco. And he was lecturing there, I think it was in 2009 or 2010, something like that. He was lecturing all over at Stanford University. And he had a lecture at the JCC for about 1,000 people. And at the very end of the lecture, there was a Q&A. And Rabbi Steinsaltz took a question from this woman who stood up and said, Rabbi Steinsaltz, please, how can I come close to God? Sorry, she said, how can I feel God? How can I come close to God? And Rabbi Steinsaltz, without hesitation, said to her, well, you're asking two separate questions. How can you feel God? Possibly a few milligrams of LSD will help you. This was the typical Rabbi Steinsaltz answer. You know, you can imagine the San Francisco, you know, the feelings and all of that. So possibly a few milligrams of LSD will help you. But how can you come close to God? You have 613 ways to come close to God. Pick one. And that's the genius of the 613 mitzvot that bring upon merit to each and every one of us. So that's the idea of the 613 commandments. Let's move to the next question. Why, this is the next question. Why is Noach and the flood such an important story in Judaism when Noach wasn't Jewish? So true, the first Jew might have been Abraham, even though what makes us Jewish really is the pledge that we took on Mount Sinai to be God's nation and to be that chosen nation, so to speak, and to adhere to the Torah. So Moses might have been the first Jew, or any Jew from that generation must have been, but some say it was Abraham for whatever reason. But certainly Noach, that came 10 generations before him, before Abraham was not Jewish. So why do we make such a big deal in the Torah about Noach and the flood when he wasn't Jewish? So I will say this, first and foremost, we as Jews, we were sent as ambassadors of the divine to this world. And therefore, anything that happened to this world, we must learn, we must connect to. The flood happened to this world to teach us a lesson of how to behave, and therefore we have to learn from it. So whether it's a Jewish story or not Jewish story, because we live in this world, we have to learn this world. You know, one of the prayers that, one of the manuscripts that was just revealed among the rediscovered manuscripts that Rabbi Steinsaltz left after his passing was a prayer that he wrote, a very powerful prayer. Maybe Janet, I'll send it to you and you can send it to the rest of the group. But there he speaks about this imaginary partition between the Torah and the world, that really they're one. And in that prayer, he asks God that that he should remove this imaginary partition between the Torah and the world, so that when he looks at the world, he sees in it God's Torah, and when he looks at the Torah, he sees in it God's world. So there's this imaginary partition, because really God and Torah and the world are one. They will all come from God. They're all creations of God. And therefore, we ought to learn about the world, whether it's a Jewish part of the world or not. But secondly, I also think that the Noach story is a powerful one. And that is because it teaches us how low human beings can go, and also how far we can climb back. And that's the story of Noach. Story of Noach is not just a story that happened thousands of years ago, but it's a story of our lives. Sometimes we fall very low, but it doesn't mean that humanity ends there, or that we end there where we fall. No, even if we hit rock bottom, which is what happened to the generation of Noah, God gives us a second chance. It's enough to cleanse ourselves, which is the idea of the flood, to almost go maybe through either very, very realistic rehab or a spiritual rehab, some type of cleansing, which, by the way, is the idea of the mikvah. The mikvah is this idea that you can come out as a brand new person, as Maimonides writes, and you can start life again. Noah comes out of the flood. What does he do? He plants a vineyard. His children have children. And from those children, the rest of humanity is created. We come from those children. So it's the idea that, and that's why I think it's such a vital story. It's the idea that, yes, humanity can be filled with flaws. We can fall very, very low, but we can also rise again like Noah did. And God is there when we fall, and God is there when we rise. And that's really the idea of the story of Noah. Last question, and I want to open this up. So where did this start in the Jewish religion to help enemies? I understand the concept in theory of helping one person, you help the world. But does the Jewish religion take it a bit too far? That you have to help your enemies. So first of all, there's this idea that every human being is created in the image of God. Now, therefore, we have to help every human being, regardless of who they are. Now, there are exceptions, of course. If your enemy is going to be helped, and it's going to bolster his hatred, and more people are going to be harmed, then maybe he should be helped in a negative way, which means that he should be helped in a way that he should be brought to justice. He should be helped in a way that he should be educated or brought to rehab. We should be helped in a way that's going to be maybe disciplining him instead of just helping him. Because I think the key question here is, how do you define help? And it's just like our children. And I'm not comparing, God forbid, enemies to children, but to our own children, it's the exact opposite. It's what we love the most in the world. But our children sometimes also need discipline. The best way we can help them is by saying no, not by saying yes. And same here with enemies. Enemies are created in the image of God. Sometimes the best way to help them is by saying yes. Sometimes the best way to help them is by saying no. So the question is really, how do you define help? Help has become such a vague and loose word these days that we think that help is about giving love and so on. Sometimes it's about the opposite of giving love. It's about being severe. It's about giving discipline, not love. So I think that's the key. And Judaism is actually very clear about that there needs to be what's called ahava and yirah, love and fear. That's this healthy balance between giving and also restricting from giving, severance. And when we give too much, then we're actually harming the person. And therefore help can always be giving and giving. Sometimes it has to be restraining. But yes, our enemies have to be helped because they too were created in the image of God. In fact, it reminds me of the Midrash that says that the angels went to complain to God when the Egyptians were drowning in the Red Sea. Why? Because as the sea was being split after the grand exodus from Egypt, the Jews erupted in song to thank God for the great miracles. It's a song that we say each and every day in the morning prayer, Az Yashir Moshe. But the angels came and complained and said, God, your creations are drowning and they are singing. Your creations are drowning and they are singing. And they had a point. Sometimes, I mean, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have not sung or should have not sung, because God eventually actually appreciated the song. And therefore we say it each and every day. But there is a point in saying that, 1 second, let me see my enemy in a different light. And he too is created in the image of God. It should hurt us that our enemies are maybe entangled by evil doings. Because at the end of the day, it's a piece of God that's being entangled by evil doings. It's not just an enemy. And I think if we had this perspective on human beings, very often we would realize that our enemies are really not enemies. They're divine beings that have good in them. And yes, they're trapped in all sorts of things. But maybe it's time to see them in a different light. And when we project divinity, then we evoke divinity in them and then they change. And maybe that's the best way to help them. But that's something to keep in mind. I think that's why Judaism is so strong on this point. Okay, those are the questions we received. Janet, I don't know if you received any other questions, but I did receive another question here via the chat. And again, feel free to chat me the questions. I'll relate to them now, or to unmute yourselves. That's the question. But let me relate to this one, Janet. If you received any further emails, let me know after this question, and then we'll open this up. So what is the deeper meaning of the letter Shin? It's a good question, because we see that Shin everywhere, right? On the mezuzah, on our doorpost, we see a Shin, the letter Shin. On the tefillin that we wear, there's a letter Shin right here. There's actually two letters of Shin, one 3-leg Shin, another one a 4-leg Shin. We see Shin also in the way we wrap tefillin here. I don't know, in all sorts of other places in Judaism. But the letter Shin is one of the letters of God that represents the name of God, that is Shin Dalet Yud, which stands for the 3 words, Hebrew words of Shomer Daltot Hashem, which means the guardian of doors, God. God is the guardian of doors. And therefore the letter Shin is a letter also that represents God's protection. That's why we draw the letter Shin on our mezuzahs, because that's the idea of having a mezuzah on your doorpost, to invite God's protection to the home, to create a spiritual alarm system, so to speak. That's the Shin. And that's what really represents. Now, in addition to that, the Shin also is a 3-legged letter, right? Up, or 3 legs that are upside down, so to speak, right? You have 3 legs. Now, what's interesting is that the number 3 is also a prominent number. We spoke about the number 7 and 8 earlier, but the number 3 is also a prominent number in Judaism, because the number 3 is the number that represents unity. How so? When you have the number 1, you only have 1 opinion. When you have a number 2, you have two separate opinions now. The number 3 comes and unites those opinions together. That's why a Beth Din, a rabbinic court, has to have at least 3 judges to have a unity of opinions or of rulings, so that if 2 disagree, a third one comes and creates a unity, some type of majority, a harmony between the 3. So the number 3 is a number of unity and of harmony. And therefore, also the letter Shin is an important letter, because it's another blessing that we bestow upon each other, upon ourselves, when we have the letter Shin displayed. It's the blessing of unity. That's what we strive for, to have harmony in the household. And when the mezuzah evokes the letter Shin, then it reminds the one staring at it as he comes into his home that he too should compromise in order to have unity, like the letter Shin represents in the home, to have peace in the home. So that's another symbol of the letter Shin. And last but not least, the letter Shin also represents the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's why the 3 legs of the letter Shin. And in a way, those forefathers are our very roots. That's where we come from. So the third symbol of this letter is not just God's protection, it's not just the unity that it evokes, but also this reminder that we come from somewhere. As Winston Churchill so beautifully put it, you cannot know where you are going if you do not know where you came from. And we have to know where we come from. We come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it reminds us again of our soul, of who we are. And once we connect with the letter Shin, then we're able also to know where we are going. So that's the deeper meaning of the letter Shin. Yes, Janet.
I have a question, and actually it's in reference to the mezuzah. Is there a height restriction when you're affixing it? And if so, what is it and why?
Question. So that's a very good question. So yes, ideally it should be in the first third of the doorpost. It should be placed on the right side of the door. So the first third from the top. If you had to divide the doorpost into 3, right, you put it on the upper third.
Okay.
Anywhere there, preferably.
And why?
Now, why? Because it's a good question, and that's because again, the mezuzah itself has to remind us of God, And therefore we have to look up. It's just like we would look up at someone that we respect. Out of respect to God, we look up at God. Now, if you're a basketball player, then you're probably looking down. But for the rest of us, shorties, then we'll be looking up. And that's the way we should respect God. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But what about children? If they're little to kiss the mezuzah, they might not reach it.
So I think it's a greater point of education that we make when we say to the child, let me pick you up towards Hashem. Instead of bringing Hashem towards you and adapting him to you, you adapt yourself to him. It creates a greater respect in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the child towards God. I think eventually also it inculcates in him this idea that we have to conform ourselves to God. God doesn't conform himself to human beings. Truth is truth. And we have to conform ourselves. I think that's the genius of the Jewish calendar. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin speaks about that, of how the festivals and the many occasions in the Jewish calendar are never on time. Speak to a Jew, they'll tell you, oh, Rosh Hashanah came in early this year. Oh, it came in late this year. It's never on time. But the genius of that is that when we conform ourselves to a calendar, that's what ensures its eternity. If I start changing it based on my needs, then the next generation will have different needs and they'll change it again. And that will really obliterate the Jewish calendar or any type of truth. When we conform ourselves to a truth, then that's when the truth becomes eternal.
Maybe that's why Jews are never on time.
Maybe. That's it. Exactly. Jewish time.
Right.
Very good. All right. Any other questions? Please feel free. Yes, please, Haiti.
This is just a logistical one. When you're coming through the door and you have a lot of packages in your hand, like carrying groceries in from the car, and your hands are pretty full, how do you touch the mezuzah, or do you put everything down, or do you go in first and touch it and then come back? How do you logistically?
Right.
Are you carrying kids or something?
Right. So we teach our kids, and we do it ourselves, to kiss the mezuzah. But the idea is to recognize again that there's a God in this house, that I can't just behave the way I want, that there has to be unity, as we mentioned, and that this house has to be a home, not just a house, to put it that way. Now, if we can't kiss it, looking at it would achieve the same goal. Looking at it so that we can rise to that level of awareness, then that achieves the same goal. So it's not like you have to go crazy and juggle the.
So you're paying respect to it by bringing it up to more consciousness. I see. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Okay.
Sure. Any other questions? Any?
Okay, I will ask.
I have a question.
Yes. Sue and Hannah, whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Okay, I know Jewish people aren't supposed to tattoo their body, correct?
Yes.
Okay, then why is it okay for women to get their ears pierced?
Oh, that's a very good question. So, the question is, how do you? So it says, let's go to the very verse in Leviticus that says that ktovet ka'aka. That's what tattoo is called in the Torah, which means an inscription of tattoo. It doesn't just say ka'aka. It says ktovet ka'aka. Lot tisretu bivsachem. That's what it says. That you should not engrave in your flesh. And the question is, how do you define an inscription of tattoos? Why does it just say tattoos? And the definition is that which does not harm the body, or to put it this way, that does not change the original intention of the body. And earrings is an age-old tradition that doesn't really change. It's put in a place also where there's almost no nerves and nothing. And therefore, it's not considered to be an inscription of a tattoo. But other places in the body are considered to change the body or to make an impact on the flesh and even change that flesh. So therefore, it's allowed. And other places are not allowed. It's the definition of this ktovet kaka again, of this inscription.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure. Good question. I want to go, just if we're already speaking about tattoos, I want to right now debunk this myth, because I know that there's a myth out there that says that people with tattoos can't be buried in Jewish cemeteries. As mentioned, it's a complete myth. It's the furthest thing from the truth.
Oh,
And so it's worthwhile, if we're already speaking about tattoos, it's worthwhile mentioning that.
Where did that myth come from?
I don't know. Where do most myths come from? I don't know. Some guy was high on LSD, took Rabbi Stein's words seriously, started spreading myths. I don't know.
Well, so, my question is more like, it seems like when you were talking about the sheen, that, so many explanations, and it seems like everything in Judaism, which I love, has, like Sheva Yemei Mitzvah and Arba, all that stuff. Is that something that was interpreted later on, or was this something when these things happened that they were happening for a reason? Because like now listening to you with the Shema, with the Shin, the letter Shin, it's fascinating to me. So is that something that over the years was interpreted, or does it make sense, my question? It seems the 613 mitzvot, is that something that happened at the beginning, or was this interpreted later? I just am so fascinated.
Great question. It's a great question. And the Talmud relates to it by stating, and I quote, Kol ma shetalmid vatik atid lechadesh nitan leMoshe miSinai, which means that whatever a student in the future will reveal or will introduce to the world, any interpretation commentary that student in the future will reveal to the world was already given to Moses on Mount Sinai. So what does this mean? It means that all these interpretations and commentaries, we believe, were given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Moses received 2 separate laws on Mount Sinai. He received the written law and he received the oral law, and he received them together. Now, of course, as human beings, we are drawn to the tangible. So we are drawn to that which the eye can see, to that which the eye can feel, and so on. And therefore, the written law has become so dominant. But let us not forget that there was an oral law that was given to Moses to be able to explain this written law, sometimes to explain the literal meaning of the written law. For example, many of the mitzvot could not be understood without this oral law. For example, respecting your parents. It says, right, it's one of the 10 commandments to respect. It doesn't tell you how. How do you respect your parents? So, like, do you have to polish their shoes every day? What does that mean? So the oral law that Moses also received came to explain what it means. It means you can't call them by name. It means you can't sit in their seat. It means you can't raise your voices. It means you have to rise before them. It means all sorts of things. But an oral law was given to interpret the literal meaning, and sometimes also the spiritual meaning, like we're speaking about regarding the letter Shin. The spiritual meaning was also given. Now, unfortunately, because again, we're human beings that are drawn to the tangible, the intangible, the what we listen to gets lost. But therefore, we have the Kabbalists who came and wrote it down, who taught it to the world. And therefore, we have so many other authors and sages who came and created some eternity to it by inscribing them. Janet, you had a question.
Can we at some point study? The only thing I've never studied is the Talmud.
Yeah, so the Talmud is, of course, we should study the Talmud.
Never studied it with all my years.
I encourage you to go to the Shalhevet program And that's the program in which we've partnered with incredible students from Rabbi post high school yeshiva, and they are giving their time once a week or twice a week in order to learn one-on-one with people. And one of the tracks you can pick is the Talmud. So I would encourage you to study with one of these brilliant students.
Rabbi,
I
have a question. Yes,
yeah,
please.
please.
This has got nothing to do with Hanukkah, so I hope it's okay.
No
I'm
problem.
just curious to know what the Jewish religion thinks about a lady being a surrogate, a person being a surrogate for another family. Is that accepted?
Absolutely. I mean, it has to follow certain rules, but absolutely, if it comes to help people who can't give birth, then absolutely. In fact, there is, if we're already speaking about it, there is an organization in Israel called Mechon Pu'ah, which I would recommend to anyone who's having difficulties having children, that is known for its excellence in science and excellence in halakha.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, I muted everybody and I muted you. I have so much power over you. Wow.
No problem. I realize that. And I think you have one last warning, Hannah, and then I'm...
Well, I was following somebody asked me to do it, so I did it, okay? I'm not going to tell you who.
No problem. So this Mechon Pu'ah, this organization merges the two so beautifully together and answers all of these intricate questions about, for example, does a surrogate have to be Jewish? Does a surrogate have to follow certain customs? How does the IVF occur exactly? I mean, there's many instructions that I'm not an expert in, but that pertain to this topic. But in general, to answer your question very generally, yes, absolutely.
It is my niece in Israel who's doing that.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
She's already got 3 kids.
I see. Well, yeah, well, it's welcome in Judaism, and God bless her, really. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi.
Absolutely. Janet, you had a question.
Yeah, it was actually back on the tattoo. Wasn't really a question. Well, the tattooing. Isn't it? I know. Obviously, it's the answer is what you had mentioned about marring the body, but it has nothing to do. Does it have anything to do with the concentration camp and isn't that a Baba Mindsa about it's
Right.
because of that, or
Right.
in law?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and obviously those who were forced to be tattooed, right, forced into it, then they are completely innocent and they are holy people. I mean, I've always say Holocaust victims and survivors are as holy as it gets.
No, I know that I guess what I was saying is that there are people that feel that it is against the Jewish law because it was done to the Jews in the Holocaust.
Oh, I see. No, there's no relations. No.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Even though you remind me of a dear friend I have who was the boxing champion of Israel some 15 years ago. His name is Merchav Mohar. And whenever he would, and he had a very impressive record of, I think, 22 wins versus 0 losses or something like that. And whenever he would go in a boxing ring, he would be wrapped in the flag of Israel. He had a shorts with the Star of David, and right here, I think his left arm or his right arm, maybe his left arm, had a verse from Israel's national Hatikva. And I asked him, why do you have this verse right here tattooed? He said, that's because my mother was a Holocaust survivor. She has a tattoo. So I wanted to tattoo myself also on the same arm so that people know that we have transformed this tattoo into a source of strength and a source of might. And each
I
time
like
I
that.
punch my enemy, I say, there you go, you Nazi.
I love it.
So anyway, you can look him up, Merchav Mohag, a lovely, lovely human being.
Interesting. Thanks.
Sure.
Rabbi,
Yes. Yes, Elena.
hi,
Yeah. Hi, how are you?
good.
Good.
Just kind of follow up on tattoos. What about plastic surgeries in Judaism?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question. So, and it's a very, very complicated subject, because if I'm getting plastic surgery solely for cosmetics, then it's prohibited. Because again, my body's not mine, and that's part of the reason tattoos are prohibited. My body's not mine. I can't just do whatever I want with my body. Now, if I'm doing this for health reasons, and sometimes emotional health is also health, then there are reasons to permit. But every case has to be judged differently. And you know, everyone has to go and consult with their local rabbi.